Welcome back. Lunch, day 2, done. It's just a few more hours of presentations. 279 slides, a bus ride and dinner, and we'll be done. Okay, we'd like to thank our sponsors for the morning session, who were Barco, and for this afternoon session, who are OCT. And we're going to move on to the final part now, the E, the thing we're all about, the experience part of the whole SATE conference. We're going to run straight through to Q&A at the end. So there's 3 presentations, Q&A, because as we all know, we have to be done by 4 o'clock. So first up, Lewis, I'll let you start.
How's everybody doing today? Did you guys have a good lunch? Fantastic. So I want to talk today about something that is earlier in the process than anything that we've talked about so far. You know, there have been a lot of discussions about what's going on from a technical standpoint, from what's involved with the development process, through the implementation process, through the opening. One thing that is not being talked about a lot in the marketplace, especially in emerging markets, is the power of brand storytelling. This is an important subject that needs to be addressed not only by the companies that we're dealing with, but for the guests, and really each of the companies that we're here representing or participating amongst. You know, there are a lot of stories being told around the world by companies that are affecting all of our lives. There are individuals that have stories, there are companies, and there are products that are out there that are touching each of our lives, influencing each of our lives, and changing each of our daily lives. One of those things that I would emphasize is that that relationship that's being formed is the relationship between the brand and the consumer, and that the most successful of those brands understand that that's a co-created relationship, that their brand is essentially a platform for participating in creating that brand and how they manifest that brand with their consumer audience. You know, there are a lot of very successful brands in the world, but the most successful brands are the ones who understand how to leverage this kind of relationship experience. And I want to emphasize that this brand experience is infinitely larger than location-based entertainment. You know, we're looking at brands here up on the screen that are transactional-based, sports-based, social media-based, film-based, vehicle-based, clothing-based. It transcends every aspect of our lives and how these brands are developed, manifested, and the relationship that's being formed with the audience. Today's competitive environment that is a very fractured environment from a social standpoint, an economic standpoint, and even a political standpoint. What is the thing that differentiates people's selection of how to spend their time and their money? Brand is the key differentiator in the current market. You hear a lot of people talk about IP. There's a difference between IP and between brand. And I want to emphasize brand is about the company itself, what its essence is, what its value proposition to the guests are, what its mission, vision, and values are, and how it forms that co-creative relationship with each of the participants in their ecosystem. IP is a slice of that. You know, if we think about that as a siloed component, IP is a product of what the brand is generating, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that during the presentation. Highly successful brands are leveraging the power of brand storytelling in every decision that they make. Every component of the environment that they articulate is leveraging this power of brand storytelling. Why is this important? Brand storytelling is understanding how to translate your brand into the meaningful experience that you have with the guest. So when you think about each of these different kinds of brands that I talked about earlier, each one has a different kind of intersection point with their audience. And it's a question of how do they articulate that, how do they express that, and how do they interact with the guest to bring that manifestation to life. We remember moments, we don't remember days. So each of these times a brand intersects with an individual, they have to think very hard about how they want to leave that imprint. You know, like I said a moment ago, I'm going to plant a seed about how we think about this brand opportunity and what branding means, think about the reality that the brands, each time they touch you, are trying to plant a seed in you for how their relationship is going to manifest to you and what you're going to think about when you think about this particular brand in your life. Brands that tell great stories are brands that stand out in everyday life. You know, they understand how, in a complex and varied world, how to stand out, how to maintain a top-of-mind campaign, and how to create an emotional connection with each of you that is important to their overall success and your success in adopting that brand overall as a part of your life. I want to give you first, before we get into kind of the technical aspects behind this, some examples of great storytelling destinations that are around the world as well as brands. So right here in China, obviously the most successful, in my opinion, domestic entertainment developer so far has been the Chimelong Group. And they have an intrinsic understanding of what their brand is. Their brand is about connecting families through the wonder of nature. And everything that they've done from a branding standpoint and what they've developed as an experience is a manifestation of how to articulate that overall concept. For those of you who've been to Singapore, Gardens by the Bay is an ecotourism experience that gives you an opportunity to participate and see life up front from a very close vantage point, and for you to integrate within an environment in a way that's not available in other places around the world. The Forbidden City here in China is an example of cultural brand storytelling. You know, we've talked a little bit about the pride in the Chinese culture. We've talked about the storytelling that's here in China. The Forbidden City is an opportunity to share that with the world and to articulate that in a cultural message and how we interact with the overall public, both from a domestic standpoint for people who have traveled domestically to that location, as well as to educate foreign visitors from around the world. Disney Shanghai and Disney companies overall is a wellspring of information that has inspired many of these people in the room in our industry overall. In addition to that, Disney is one of the very first companies in the world to understand how to manifest and articulate its brand throughout every element of its company from a vertically integrated standpoint through every mixed-use destination that they have. They understand what their brand essence represents, how to do that in media, how to do that in social content, how to do that in resort development, in theme parks, and in merchandise. It's a very robust system of understanding how to form a relationship with the guests and how to express that through every means that they have as a corporate standpoint. Nike, as I mentioned earlier, Nike has a very unique relationship with its users. Their understanding of their users, which we'll dive into in a little bit more, is an understanding of that each of the people in this room, or each of the people that they touch, is an athlete, and that their relationship is reaching their optimal performance level as athletes together, using their brand as a platform for your participation and success. Probably the single greatest brand manifestation on earth at this point is Dubai. You know, Dubai, just a few years ago, was a handful of buildings in the desert. Dubai culturally has a unique Bedouin culture, but it wasn't a destination. It was an oil-rich country. It took vision of some individuals to think about rebranding this experience into what it's become today. It's one of the leading destinations for people to travel to around the world. You know, out of the sand came this amazing city, and what they've done is reconceived this city as a lifestyle destination for the elite. You can go to Dubai, and whatever it is you imagine or you want to be, you aspire to be, you can achieve when you go to Dubai. So what does brand storytelling involve, and how does it affect my company, or how can I leverage it at my company? There are 5 general principles that we apply to brand storytelling overall, and we're going to touch on each of those principles here. First, I want to emphasize that everything we're talking about here is interrelated. These objects don't happen individually. It has to be thought of holistically. And when you think about how these elements touch each other and how they influence each other, it's important to keep that in mind. So I like triangles. We refer to them quite often. Most important question, I think, to everybody in this room and every brand that we talk about is this center component right here. Why should people care? Why should somebody buy my product? Why should somebody hire me? Why should somebody hire any of us here in this room? So we need to think about what motivates these individuals. How do we express meeting their pain points or their critical issues? So first, we're looking at this from a brand standpoint. Our brand, what are our mission, vision, and values? What do we represent as people, as a company, or as an overall entity in the marketplace? How does the destination or the content or the delivery mechanism represent itself? You know, it's an idea, an emotion, and a goal that's trying to be fulfilled. And in addition to that is an understanding, at least in our case, from a location-based entertainment standpoint, what works in our market. So really, success in location-based entertainment is a balanced opportunity between story, technology, and implementation. And again, all of these components have to be in equal balance. They have to overlap each other, and the true synergy that takes place is in the center spot where these components overlap. There's a term in Japanese that's a bit more robust than this, but it's called ikigai. And that's where there's an ability to see kind of what you do, how you can get paid, what you have skills for, and what you can do to influence the world, where all of those overlap. The center spot in that is where ikigai is achieved. Beyond what we're thinking about from an individual standpoint, the second layer of this is understanding how does this work in the business ecosystem. So when we talk about a brand overall, a brand has its own goals overall. A developer who's going to hire and secure that brand, license that brand, or partner with that brand has a goal. And then in the case of mixed-use developments, we have tenants who have goals. How do these need to participate from a business standpoint to achieve the goals that we saw on the first slide? First and foremost, as I mentioned, of the 5 steps, is to know your brand. How do we define a meaningful experience of what our brand is and how it manifests itself? The most fundamental elements of that are understanding what is your value proposition to the audience that you're trying to communicate with or to have purchase your product or your service. Second to that is understanding your mission, vision, and values as a company. How do you articulate what it is you stand for, what it is you are trying to do or lead in the marketplace, and what values do you have as a company that you are articulating and sharing with each of your employees? Because essentially, each of those individuals is out there participating and explaining what your company is to the rest of the world. So you have to make sure that you're very clear about that internally to ensure that that's executed externally. And then you need to do an analysis of what's truly authentic to expressing that in yourself. Additionally, if you have the time or the wherewithal, is to understand what is authentic about your competitor and what's authentic about the audience that you're seeking to participate with to ensure that you're in alignment and differentiating yourself in those overall components. Here, there are a number of examples we can look at for brands that truly understand their value proposition in a very clear and concise way that touches the entire marketplace. Mobike has transformed the entire transportation system in China. You know, 10 years ago when I started coming to China, everybody had a bicycle. Now, nobody has a bicycle. Everybody from a transportation standpoint has gone for convenience and is using Mobike. Marvel is epic storytelling with heart. How many people in here took a moment and saw either Infinity War or Endgame? You think about, that's a large number of people. You know, our products, that what we do from a brand standpoint, from a creative standpoint, and even from music that was touched on earlier, we transcend barriers. Whatever it is that's out there, people in a room together, seeing a movie or listening to music are touched as a group. There's far much far more that we share as people together than that separates us. Nike, just do it. This is a motto that they've had for over a generation now, but it is at the core of what they are and what they represent. And they understand that their value proposition is bringing inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And they go on further to identify that basically anybody who has a body is an athlete. They have a mission, vision, and value statement that they define in 11 maxims. They understand that they're a company, they are there to innovate, that they are a brand, that they are to simplify and move forward. The consumer decides. Again, it's understanding the consumer that they're engaging with, to absorb things, to evolve immediately, do the right thing, master the fundamentals, always be on the offensive, and to always remember the founder of the company, which I think also resonates in China, where the chairman of the company has a great deal of influence over the overall organization. As I mentioned earlier, Chimelong, very strong at understanding their connection to nature, and one of the most successful original IP brands here in China. Disney is entertainment with heart. And Hershey, a client of ours, understands as a food company that they're the sweetest place on earth. And I need to pick up the pace. Alibaba, incredibly successful company here in China and globally. And what they do beyond their typical 5 propositions is they tackle something internationally and understanding how to bring Chinese businesses together with foreign purchasing agents. Every decision a brand makes should reflect these values. Understanding just a sense here, comparing brands to each other, differences between Disney, Universal, Six Flags, and Chimelong, we understand that there are a different sensibility of how they apply themselves to understanding their audiences. And again, reinforcing the same triangle I said before, each of those companies understands their intersection with this and how they do business with this general format and understanding. Understanding the consumer. If you're dealing with an entertainment property or a destination property, you want to know what mom wants. Mom is typically 85% of the time the person who decides where you're going and what you're going to do. So that's the person you need to understand from a brand standpoint, who you're touching and why they're making that decision. In China, grandparents have a great deal of influence over that in the family unit. The most important component that touches me in a deep way is understanding storytelling. And understanding that storytelling is there to inspire and touch people, move them. We understand and think in stories. As I mentioned before, stories transcend culture. They transcend race, religion, things that differentiate us. And stories evoke emotions, personal identification, interpersonal connections. They bring us together in ways that we cannot really intrinsically define. It's, obviously it's the nature of the soul and the things that we talk about as people that separate us from the machines that we were talking about earlier. Stories open new worlds, and they ask questions. And when those questions are answered, they create a promise. And what's interesting, particularly in location-based entertainment, is we translate that promise into a place. And what happens is that combination of story, question, and promise creates a very powerful relationship that's lasting to a brand and creates a long-term opportunity there with the guest. To effectively maximize that, we need to think in terms of a complete strategy. What is location-based entertainment? Location-based entertainment is all of these things. It's not just theme parks. And that's something that we, as a culture and an entity and an organization, need to share and get out to the rest of the world. Successful brands understand that the consumer is the hero of the story, that we're taking them on the hero's journey and that we are a platform for their heroic success. We need to examine how do we see their transformation with the use of our brand and that overall expression, and understanding the pre-experience, the during experience, and the post-experience, and examining the customer journey map throughout the entire process of their engagement with us. We need to establish a strong business model. There are a lot of projects here in China right now that don't make fiscal sense. It doesn't do any of us any good here in this room or the owners or even culturally to have projects open up that are going to close in a year or two. The business model needs to make sense, it needs to be sustainable, and it needs to grow success in the overall industry. What works in location-based entertainment, as I mentioned earlier, is a balance of story, technology, and implementation. And we can look at this from a creative, technical, and operational standpoint. You know, there aren't a lot of operational people speaking today, but I think it's very important that from the very onset of any project, the operational people have to be at the table because they influence the delivery of all of this content from the moment the creatives turn it over. How do we leverage this opportunity? Every major project in the world right now is a mixed-use project. Most of the projects in China right now are mixed-use projects. What do I mean by that? You know, this is an opportunity where we're looking at creating new communities, how we interface with those communities and what's represented in those communities. Each of these projects that's out there in the world, especially here in China, is a reflection of having commercial assets, retail assets, residential assets, entertainment, cultural, institutional, and has this opportunity as a community hub. What does, or how does brand storytelling apply to my business? You know, how do I leverage that? Many of the companies here that are developers need to think in a vertically integrated format. And here's an example of Disney. And this is back in the 50s and the 60s, how they looked at understanding each of their business components and how they drew the relationships to the organization and the format within those. To kind of give you a much simpler kind of breakdown on what that is, you know, we're talking about a corporate development, concept development, and each of these components as they're structured, you know, vertically and horizontally. Brand comes from the corporate component that's up there. We've got the 360-degree strategy as we look at development and creative assets. We've got the destination engine. If you're building a mixed-use component, entertainment should be one of the core elements that's driving people to your destination, creating footfall, creating kind of a magnet to keep people in that space. And then we have these other components here. This very large box as our opportunity to create revenue overall for this brand and for this owner or for ourselves. You know, we're looking at amenities, sports, consumer products, licensing, residential, property leasing, all of those components. Again, referring back to my triangle that we'll get to in a second. Again, all of it should be pursuing your mission, vision, and values, your understanding of your value proposition, and how you're articulating that and understanding meeting your consumers' needs. Within that, we need to make sure that reflecting that, we're reflecting a very consistent message. Every decision we make and everything we do should reinforce those overall concepts. You know, you need to think about this as an ongoing act of brand storytelling and world building for creating and articulating your message. You want to stay on message. You don't want to vary from that. All of the brands that have power are consistent in how they articulate and deliver their message across all platforms. We're going to scoot forward here. We got key takeaways. Again, I want to re-emphasize, know your brand. Know your value proposition. Know your mission, vision, and values, and know your consumer. Every message that we make should reflect an understanding of these principles. Great brands tell great stories. You know, the guest should be the hero, and understand that your brand is transformative for the guest. Your role in that is a platform for them to achieve their aspirations and the greater potential of themselves. You want to create an extraordinary world for your heroes to participate in, and you want to co-create on that platform. So Disney, Nike, they're not transforming the guest. They're creating the opportunity for those guests to create moments together that they carry with them for the rest of their lives. Knowing how to translate that brand is of critical importance. You want to use story as a vehicle to make that emotional connection and how you want to participate in their lives overall. The power of brand storytelling is leveraged when your consumer hears the name of your brand and it evokes a feeling. When you think about Disney, or you think about Nike, or you think about WeChat, or you think about Tencent, you have an idea in your mind about what that brand is and how it manifests itself as a part of your life. That is successful brand storytelling, and each of us in this room needs to be doing that for ourselves, our company, and our clients. You know, again, I'm going to leave this, we'll make this available in English and Mandarin, but these two triangles really emphasize how this ecosystem works overall. And I would just say, you know, lifting the statement from Nike, brand storytelling, just do it, adopt it, make it a part of your fabric, okay?